big hello and a very warm welcome to Brand Equity with me, Sonali Krishna. It's the big Martin Sorrell interview this week, and he's a man who needs no introduction at all. A legend in the advertising world and the executive chairman of S4 Capital, who is no madman, but a math man. An interview with Martin Sorrell is always a highlight, as he's one of the few leaders I've interviewed who says it as it is. In a world filled with political correctness and posturing, Martin's style is serving views in a non-sugar-coated manner, which is a real treat to the ear. And with that, without any further ado, joining me from the United Kingdom is the legend himself, Martin Sorrell. Thank you so much for joining me right here, on the Brand Equity Show. It's been a while. I wish I could have met you in person to do this, because it's always a pleasure interviewing you. How have you been?
I'm fine, Sonali. I've got over my little medical problem last year, and everything so far, touch wood, so far so good. So thanks for asking. And it's a great pity you're not coming to Cannes, because you seem to be absorbed with the Indian elections. That seems to be the only thing on your agenda. You're not interested in advertising and marketing anymore, or AI, or maybe is AI interfering with the Indian election or not?
Who knows? We'll know on the 4th of June.
Well, you know what I think. I think India will be better off with Modi, but that's my view.
Right. Well, it's election time, and everybody is, the election fever is quite real and full on. So I would not want to comment on any political party, because I would be in violation of the moral conduct of the election code. So I'm going to desist answering to that particular question. But feel free to give me your views of the Indian economy and the election so far, and who you see as a worthy leader, because a guest can give us views, but as a journalist, I need to abstain.
All right. Well, my view, I just expressed it. I think Modi has done a great job for Brand India. I mean, somewhat controversial in various areas, but most political leaders, good ones, probably create controversy because they have visions, they have policies, they have plans, they have ideas that they wish to implement. And I think you asked me about the Indian economy. The Indian economy is going from strength to strength. India is going to be already the most populous country on the planet, and will be, by 2050, the third largest economy in the world, after probably the US. Well, China probably will surpass the US, then the US, after China, and then India. So, and then you'll have Indonesia and Germany in the top 5. So 3 of the top 5 markets by 2050 will be Asian markets. So not just India, but Asia as a whole. And of course, India is benefiting from the uncertainty, the political uncertainty around Taiwan, the biggest beneficiary, I think. I mean, India has got its own momentum from an economic point of view. It's got world-class entrepreneurs, world-class Indian companies that are increasingly expanding their scope internationally. As they expand worldwide, India becomes more and more prominent. But the Indian economy on its own is strong, but it benefits from the uncertainty around China, in the sense that if you're big in China, and big means somewhere like 10 to 15 to 20% of your sales coming from China, maybe 15 to 20% more, because Chinese GDP is about 18 trillion out of 105 trillion last year. So it should be around 15 to 20%, like a Tesla and an Apple. But do you want to go bigger if you have that sort of concentration? The answer is probably no, because the risk of something happening in relation to Taiwan is probably too great. So India benefits from that, but it's a lead economy in what I call New Asia, not so much obviously Japan and Australia, New Zealand as before, but countries like India, like Vietnam, like Indonesia, Philippines, Thailand, Singapore, Malaysia. These are all countries that are benefiting from Asian growth and the halo effect of China, but also that security aspect about China as well. So larger companies that have big exposures to China are broadening their risk, both from a demand point of view, a revenue point of view, and a supply chain point of view. So, look, I think all the signals are go for India. I think all the I mean, there are challenges, obviously, political challenges, economic challenges, but generally, India is one of the growth spots in the world at the moment, in a world where there is considerable uncertainty.
Absolutely. You know, I want to unravel a lot of things you've just said, and I want to do it quite systematically. So before I deep dive into different economies and their performance and how you're looking at all of them, I first want you to give me a view of what the outlook for the advertising and communications world is looking like. We all know that, you know, 2024 is not looking very optimistic for anybody globally. Even in India, if you look at just the last quarter results of all the large consumer-facing companies, all of them have had a very sober outlook. Performance has not been in line with expectations. So we're already seeing 2024 not being you know, a very good year. And people are saying, in comparison to 23, I don't think the outlook is very optimistic. What would you say would be the kind of outlook of large clients globally, and of course that ripple effect on the advertising and marketing economy?
Well, it's a little bit of a puzzle in a minute. I mean, first of all, I think, Sonali, you have to talk about two markets. Everybody puts advertising and marketing together. They put linear, traditional network television, free to air, magazines in their old form, newspapers, radio, outdoor in their old form, together within their new form, i.e. digital. And there's two worlds, really. There's two planets or two universes that you have to talk about. The overall planet or world was about 950 billion of spending last year. This year, it will cross a trillion. I think we'll hit $1 trillion in terms of media spend. But of that 950 last year, about 650 was in digital and about 300 in linear. And it was a very different picture as to where you looked. And the same thing is true of 2024. The growth of digital, of Google, the three biggest Western platforms, Alphabet and Google, obviously, Meta and Facebook and Instagram, and Amazon, and the growth of Alibaba, Tencent, and TikTok or ByteDance, the parent company of TikTok, was probably on average last year around 10%, and this year will be similar, maybe even a little bit stronger. Linear was the reverse. Linear was down last year. Interestingly, the tech platforms last year, Alphabet, Meta, and others, Amazon, Apple, whatever, seemed to reduce their own promotional spending, which is a little bit strange, because certainly in 2024, where I think it will not be dissimilar, I don't think the pressure on tech companies' advertising and marketing spend, their own advertising and marketing spend, will be as great this year. But you know, in a world where AI, you know, this week with AI, we've seen OpenAI with its initiatives, we've seen Alphabet and Google with their initiatives, obviously Microsoft behind OpenAI. So you've seen huge change. We've seen the growth of Perplexity in sort of search, in terms of a competitor to Google on search. All these things you would think would stimulate greater ad spending by the tech companies. So I think it will come back. But I think 24 will be quite similar to 23, in that we will continue to see that divergence between digital, which will continue to grow at around 10% overall, and then linear, which will continue to decline, let's say by 5 to 10%, continue to be tough. And there won't be as much pricing up by the packaged goods companies this year. They'll continue to spend. They'll get a little bit of price increases, but obviously inflation is coming down, or the rate of inflation. I don't think it'll come down to 2%. I think that's a little bit of a pipe dream. it's pretty sticky at around 3 at the minute. And that's the reason why interest rate reductions by the Fed have been postponed. But the pressure will be less, which means that fast-moving consumer goods, that FMCG pressure will be less. And I think the tech companies will start maybe in the second half of this year, start to spend more, because the competitive pressure around AI is going to be huge. The AI industry, obviously, it's an extremely sexy industry. Everybody peppers their earnings announcements with AI or AGI for the obvious reason. I think the biggest issue is capacity is being built. NVIDIA is the major, not the only supplier, but it virtually has a monopoly of certain chips and chip supply. And NVIDIA, is expanding the capacity. The use cases, 2024 is going to be about developing the use cases for clients. We're seeing an extensive amount of experimentation, workshops, audits, but we're not seeing as yet the major AI transformation programs. So we're seeing use cases around the 5 areas that we've identified already, which I think we talked about before: visualization and copywriting, personalization at scale, media planning and buying, general agency and client efficiency, and then last, spreading knowledge, what I call the democratization of knowledge in the firm. All those things we're seeing momentum in the first 2 areas. Visualization and copywriting, very significant. Time to market in making ads, visualizing them, video, still pictures, copywriting being concertinaed, and time to market being quickened to a considerable degree. And then the other area, and this I would describe as explosive, we're seeing a lot of activity around what we call personalization at scale. So I call it the Netflix model. This is a model, an iterative advertising model that uses first-party data and signals from the platforms to provide insights into generating content, testing the content, piping out, distributing the content to consumers, seeing what their reaction is, gauging that reaction, and then going again, either with the same content or differing content at scale. Those 2 areas, we are seeing significant impact. So this year is about establishing the use cases, and then FOMO, the fear of missing out, will start to kick in, and I think we'll get considerable traction. But for the moment, it's experimentation, except in our industry, except in 2 areas. One is speed to market in terms of advertising copy and visualization. And the second thing is, which is huge at the moment, which is personalization at scale. So that's sort of upper funnel creative. And then beneath that, a content factory, what I call a factory, which people probably don't like me to call it that, but a content studio, content factory, where all the assets that you have are hung up and then adapted to the big idea, the big strategic idea, and implement it. And you can vary that distribution depending on what you see happening in the market in an iterative process. And it's highly personalized. It's also driven by the increasing tendency of clients to go direct. So we're seeing this, in Europe, in the auto industry, for example, that manufacturers are going direct to consumers and establishing direct relationships with consumers and selling from the factory, in addition to historically having sold through dealers. So direct to consumer brands are starting to use what I call Netflix on steroids with AI, so personalization at huge scale. So net, I think 24 is going to be similar to 23, despite the elections. We had the US presidential election. We obviously had the election in India. I think half the world has gone to or will be going to the polls this year. Despite that, despite the Olympics in Paris, which will probably be a more digital Olympics than we've ever seen before. So that will boost those digital advertising numbers that I mentioned before. But I think 24 will be similar to 23 overall, with that difference between linear and digital.
If I just look at, S4 Capital's, Q1 results, and of course your own commentary that has come with it, where you've clearly said that, the digital advertising space is kind of shrinking because the big tech companies are not spending as much. So you've answered that in a way, saying that they're in experimental phase, and the second half we might see some momentum. But the fact of the matter is, it has had a direct impact even on S4 Capital. The moment.
Oh, that's right. No, absolutely. And it's what I said before, Sonali. The irony, if that is an irony, of last year and to some extent this year, is that growth that we saw in spending, particularly around packaged goods last year, and I think it'll be more general this year, has gone into the platforms in terms of ad revenues. So Google last year was about 225 billion. Meta was about 125 billion. So that's 350, and then Amazon was 50. So it's about 400 billion. Out of the 650 was coming from those three platforms. They grew, but the spending that they made on advertising and marketing, I mean, if you look at the Meta numbers, they published this number, that their ad spending was down by about 25%. Right. So despite the fact that they've had good top line performance in terms of ad revenues, they've been cutting back. So it was, I don't know, we call it ironic, an anachronism or whatever it is, but I think this year is going to be similar. And what it means, it's been tougher for the agencies. Certainly we found it tougher last year, and it won't be easy again this year, in comparison to the 4 previous years when we saw very, very strong top line growth. It'll come back. Our portfolio is, of our revenues, something like 45% are tech-based. It'll come back. And I think what will drive it back is the competition in the AI field, which for the platforms, is around search. The competition that you're seeing from Perplexity, the competition that you're seeing from OpenAI, which is really the front for Microsoft. But Microsoft has pivoted very fast and is building a very strong position in search, in AI. And of course, then you have Musk, who is rumored to have raised a huge amount of money for his new AI vehicle. So you're going to see a lot of jockeying for position in search. And I think in that battle, and it is going to be a battle, marketing spend will naturally increase, so that these platforms can, beyond those I've mentioned, there are huge changes taking place with other companies in relation to LLMs and AI and AGI, which I think are going to stimulate advertising and marketing spend.
Right. Just coming to holding companies, and just looking at the performance of the holding companies, I want your view on this. I mean, it is remarkable to see the Publicis Group experiencing, quite a surge in the last couple of years, growing the revenue by almost 26% from 21 to 23, doubling its market cap from 12 billion euros in early 21 to now over 25 billion euros currently. Then we have Omnicom, its closest competitor, of course, slightly trailing behind in revenue and EBITDA, but still but 50% in market cap. And then, of course, we have WPP, of course, still leader in revenue, but it now lags far behind in profitability and value. So just wanted to understand from your perspective, of course, because you've been there and done it better than anybody else, what is the reason of the sudden change in, the pecking order in terms of just performance, and what is Publicis doing that others are not?
Well, it's embarrassing. As a WPP shareholder, it's embarrassing to see what's happened. You're absolutely right, Sonali. I mean, WPP, I think, reached about $24 billion. It's back to 10 or I think $11 billion now. And Publicis, you're right, was at $10 billion actually, and it's about $25 billion now. So the position is reversed, and there are actually sort of two divisions, but effectively it's either the top of the table, the qualifiers for the final would be Publicis, Omnicom. You left out IPG.
I'm sorry, I didn't know.
Yeah. So IPG is number 3 in market cap, I think around 13 or 14 billion.
Yeah.
And poor old WPP is number 4. And then just behind WPP, amazingly, is Dentsu, which is, I think, half the size by revenues. But you've got two levels. So the top of the table, the qualifiers would be Publicis, Omnicom, and IPG. And those not qualifying for the finals would be WPP, Dentsu, and Havas actually has had a respectable performance, but has been part of Vivendi, but looks as though it will be split out as they split out the subsidiaries of Vivendi to try and get rid of the conglomerate discount that it's selling at in the market. And the answer to your question, I think, is 2 things. Firstly, Publicis have a very good story. We're in the storytelling business, and they have a very good story around data, digital, and technological change. So they package it very well. The second is they have a very strong media operation. WPP has too, but it's really not doing as well. And Omnicom has done better as well. I think both Publicis and Omnicom have a very strong media operation, which are doing proprietary media. And there's been some commentary recently, which I think is really interesting, which has suggested, you remember that there was a bit of it's not too strong a word to use, scandal with the ANA, the American Association of National Advertisers. They issued a report in 2016 about trading and discounts, and that was, they claimed, was hidden. Now, there were investigations made and all sorts of authorities were brought in, but nothing was ever proven. I think Havas admitted to some discounts having been paid in error in Europe in relation to business globally, something like that. I think it was in Ad Age at some stage. But beyond that, there was nothing that was found. Now, what's going on at the moment is really interesting. Because of proprietary trading on the digital platforms, agencies are building into their agreements with clients the right to invest a proportion of the media budget in their own proprietary trading. This is open, transparent, people saying, we're going to do this, and clients agreeing to it. And it's even been suggested by one analyst, Brian Weiser, that the creative product is being discounted with clients. So the cost of it is being discounted in return for an agreement to put part of the media money into the agency's proprietary platforms. And you can see that if you compare billings figures, some of the agencies give billing figures, revenue figures, and net revenue, because revenue and net revenue will give you an idea to some extent of how much proprietary trading is going on. So net, Publicis, I think they've got a strong leader, Arthur Sadoun. I think he's very able, very energetic, despite his illness. He managed it, and I know personally how difficult that is, and he's managed it, I think, brilliantly, and deserves a lot of credit for that. So that's number one. Number two, he's packaged it very well because of what Maurice Levy did in terms of acquiring Epsilon and Sapient. They had a rough time in consolidating it, but it seems now to work out, and they have a good story. And then the third thing, I think, is media trading. Omnicom have not got as well-developed strategy. I think, with all due respect to John Wren, I think Arthur and the story they built has been better. But the Omnicom also has a strong trading operation. IPG, I think, I'm a little bit surprised by the valuation, and my guess is that there will be some structural changes at IPG in fairly short time. I think IPG probably will change shape. That would be my guess. WPP in the second division, if you like, I don't know. I mean, my own view is, in its current form, it's not working. I don't think they have as good a story as Publicis. I don't think they have as good a leadership as Publicis. And their media operation is strong, but it's not as strong. I mean, it's very strong, for example, in India, as you well know, but it's not as strong. Dentsu, also in Division 2, have got enormous issues internationally, huge issues. And I think, again, there will be a structural change there in time. And then with Havas, you are going to see a structural change. They've got good leadership. I think Yannick Bolloré has done a good job, a sort of mini version of Arthur Sadoun, if you like, on a smaller scale. Not as good a story, I think, as Publicis. But, you know, maybe if they're split off from Vivendi, they will start to develop a stronger position. So a very mixed picture, but, you know, all credit to Publicis for having done what they've done. I would say Division 1, in Division 1, IPG, which is up there, it's not quite as good as Omnicom or Publicis. You'll see some changes. I think there will be some changes at WPP too. They haven't managed to find a chairman for the business, which is slightly strange. Roberto Quarta has run out of time. In the UK, under the rules, after 9 years, you're meant to lose your independence, either as a non-executive director or a chairman. And Roberto has been doing the job almost for 9 years and should be changed out. But at their last AGM, they said they hadn't managed to find somebody as yet. So we'll see how that, but I think that's probably Mark Reed worrying about instinct of self-preservation. Let me put it like that.
I also want to, you know, kind of understand your view on, you know, the whole piece of you know, tech companies, and you've been very, very clear on saying that the Facebooks and the Googles of the world are not tech companies and masquerading as tech companies. They're actually media companies. There's also been a lot of discussion over time with large clients talking about the fact that there is no transparency, be it in you know, the fact what they're delivering in terms of metrics. And there's been a long movement, but of course we've not seen much of it just because of the over dependence we're seeing with digital platforms like these. You've pressed on the fact that, you know, there needs to be you know, more transparency, given the fact that there are so many issues that are arising out of privacy and data sharing. Do you see you know, these woes that are constantly being put on the table by clients, by people like you, by industry leaders, just going on as a ramble, or do you actually see them being pushed to the wall to actually do something?
No, I think, look, I think to be fair, the tech platforms, particularly Meta, was the one that came under the most pressure. I mean, just as before we started, I saw something flash up on my phone about the EU putting Meta under pressure again in relation to the impact of social media on children. So, and to their credit, I think they have 25, 30,000 people, maybe more, 30, 35,000 people, maybe 40,000 people involved in monitoring editorial content to try and deal with the privacy issues and the brand safety issues and the child safety issues that we're all concerned about. And with AI, of course, these sorts of worries multiply. So I think they have done a good job. And look, the regulator, in my view, the regulator has no chance of keeping up with these tech companies. Their resources, I mean, if Apple is 3 trillion, if Microsoft is 3 trillion in terms of market cap, if Google is close to that figure too, if Nvidia is over 2 trillion, I mean, these companies are as big as countries. I mean, Germany is about 4 trillion of GDP, and if the UK GDP is about 3.5, so you could say that, you know, Apple and the like are big countries. Very difficult to regulate because their resources and firepower is huge. the regulators have stopped them from acquiring. That's, I mentioned Microsoft and what it's done. It's pivoted in terms of AI. So they've made investments, quote unquote, instead of acquisitions, but they've established a really strong position in AI and AGI by making those investments instead of acquisitions. They're quasi-acquisitions in a sense. So that's the way they, in a way, got around those rules. But the answer, Sonali, is self-regulation. These companies, and they do understand it, they do get it. These companies are going to continue, I think, to self-regulate. They know that if they run the risk of the AT&T Standard Oil breakup, you know, we saw in telecommunications, we saw in the oil industry that companies became so powerful that the regulators broke that. And in order to avoid that, I mean, my view is those 6 platforms I mentioned, the 3 Western ones, so we're clear, Alphabet, Meta, Amazon, Alibaba, Tencent, ByteDance, those 6 platforms, you know, when you go down from them, you know, probably TikTok is doing outside, well, ByteDance, we know, went from 90 billion to 120 billion in terms of ad revenues. And of that, TikTok outside China probably has gone from 10 to 20 billion last year, and this year will be about 35 billion. So we are talking about companies, those 6 companies. Beyond that, you then go down to Snap at about 6.5 billion. Probably Apple's doing about 8 or 9 billion, not disclosed figure, but it seems their ad revenues around that. Microsoft probably around 15 billion. I think that's disclosed. But it's a big jump down from Amazon at 50. And my view, Amazon will go to 100 billion in time. So what you're seeing is these companies become more powerful. NVIDIA, Apple, and Microsoft, beyond those 6, plus Adobe, Oracle, and Salesforce, are going to be the key ones, I think, that are going to benefit from what's going on. These companies will have to self-regulate. The regulator will not have the resources unless the regulators get together on a global basis, which I think is unlikely. These companies are going to have to do it themselves. So they will continue to expand. Remember that AI demands huge investments. To create these large language models, you have to make it cost a lot of money. The power, the compute capacity required, the electricity, the fuel required is huge. And these companies are going to be the ones that do it in the future. So that would be my view on what's going to happen. The big will get bigger. There will be, you know, Musk, OpenAI, which is quasi-Microsoft, but Musk is going to be a player. There will be others, but essentially these companies are going to become more and more powerful, not through acquisition, but through organic growth or investments, as we've seen. And I think that's the way the marketplace is going to be. So that relationship with holding companies is going to be, it's going to be really interesting to see how that develops. I mentioned the 5 areas of AI. I mentioned the first 2, visualization, copywriting, and personalization at scale. I mentioned the third one, media planning and buying. I think the platforms will establish closer and closer relationships with clients. At the moment, Google has PMax, Meta has, or Facebook has Advantage Plus. These are platforms that enable planning and buying for small and medium-sized enterprises, which are probably 65 to 70% of the ad revenues of an Alphabet or a Meta. We don't know, it's not a disclosed figure, but that's a guess. The enterprise bit of it is probably the other 30, 35%. I think in time, the platforms will establish closer relationships directly with clients, and agencies will become more validators, almost resellers of those platforms. They will be the independent third party that gives clients assurances about planning and buying and media mix, etc. But the relationship between the platforms and the clients is going to get closer, because the difference with AI is that the platforms will not need large numbers of people to implement. You know, a media planning and buying network needs 10 to 15,000 people on a global basis. You know, we at S4 have about just under 8,000 people. Not all of them, obviously, the bulk of them are on content. There are data and digital media specialists and tech services, but, you know, we probably have about 3,000, 3,500, 4,000 people on data and digital and tech services. So the big platforms, the big holding companies have 10, 15,000 people. And a lot of what they do is not automated, or it's, you know, half manual, half automated work. That's going to go. You know, you won't be using a 25-year-old media planner or buyer. You'll be using an algorithm. And remember that digital is already 65, 70% of the market, and you can reduce all of that to algorithmic analysis. I mean, one of the reasons why those fast-moving consumer goods companies piled their money into the platforms last year and will continue to do this year, just look at the interview on CNBC with the CEO of Procter. And he said a really interesting interview a few weeks ago on his, they're not on a calendar year, I think it's on their third quarter results. And he said, we've increased our investment in advertising, we've increased that investment in digital. Why? It's more targeted, it's more effective, it's cheaper, and it's more measurable. And it was a great interview and a great ad, actually, for the tech platforms. Here's one of the world's biggest advertisers, maybe the biggest advertiser in the world, saying that is at investing in these things. So that's the way it's going to go. And AI, you know, I mentioned the explosion that we're seeing around personalization at scale, the Netflix model on steroids. That is going to be really effective in the future, I think, and really important.
You know, just taking a cue from what you said, so what should one assume that, you know, given the fact that you're stating that clients will have, you know, a lot more direct and an intimate relationship with these tech platforms, can one assume that we've resigned to the fate that we will continue to live in walled gardens and we cannot demand a common metric system, because the likes of Mark Pritchard, who've been shouting out and rallying for the industry to have a common metric, to have more transparency, can we safely say that we put that chapter and that big protest to bed?
No, I think we will have demands for that. And you know, I saw somebody this morning from a Scandinavian country who's developing a platform for doing exactly what you're talking about. So everybody will use the data they have, the first-party data they have, plus the signals from the platforms to build models that are useful to brands and clients as they develop their business. So you will get more walled gardens, Sonali. There's no doubt about that.
Coming back to, you know, the AI bit, and you know, you've given me a lot of information on AI and how that will play out. And while there's been such a big, you know, it's trending as so much of like action around AI, what do you think will be the real use cases? You've given me the whole bit for the media agencies and how we'll see that work out. Having said that, if I jog your memory to just a few years ago, you know, when you were at the helm of WPP and we did at Stream, we had people talk about the brand safety become such a big issue, programmatic.
Sure.
Under the radar. You know, the fact that, you know, we cannot have, you know, we can't have this all digitized. We have to have human intervention. How do you see this entire AI bit, especially with the use case in the media agency bit, and that playing out? Do you actually think human intervention is not required and AI can rule this in an efficient manner, and you know, large sums of media planners can actually let go of their jobs because AI will be a more efficient and effective way of doing the job? Do you actually believe that?
Yeah, I think they'll do their job better. So, I mean, there will be fewer of them, but the few that are left will do their job better. They'll have better data. So just running through the 5 areas that we've identified so far. Visualization and copyright speeding up. What took us 3 days takes us 3 hours.
You say they take 3 minutes versus 3 days. I completely get that. but AI will only use the resources which is already in the pool. So basically,
No. You will have to retrain resources. You may have to have different prompt engineers. You may have to have different resources. But that's an area, I think, where, to be blunt, there will be less employment.
okay.
The second area, personalization at scale, where we will sell on the basis of number of assets produced. So on outputs, big opportunity, more employment, larger numbers of assets sold at lower prices, but the resulting multiple in terms of revenue will be greater. So that's a plus. First is a minus, I think, in terms of employment. The second is a plus. Third, the media planning and buying for us, who is a disruptor, huge opportunity. For the traditional media groups, huge challenge. Turkeys don't vote for Christmas. They're going to have to vote for Christmas on this one. And this is going to be huge. So going back to your question on media planners and buyers, you won't have so many of them, but the output they will get will be superbly efficient, effective, and much more valuable. The fourth area, general agency efficient. We have this outside broadcast initiative with NVIDIA, AWS, and Adobe, where we reduce the cost of an outside broadcast by 80 or 90% using the cloud and AI. Because you used to have to buy a truck, which cost you $9 or $10 million. You amortize it over 5 years. It's $1.5 million a year of cost. We can do the cloud-based solution for $100,000, $200,000. So examples like that are where agencies and clients improve their efficiency. That will be a net. It's difficult to figure it out. There'll be more opportunities and some less opportunities, so mixed on employment. The fifth area, which I think is the most exciting, we have 900 people who work on Alphabet around the world. If we can make sure that every one of them know what the other 899 know, we have a superb team working on behalf of a client who know everything. Because the biggest problem inside organizations is they're too siloed. They have to be flattened. NVIDIA, which is the world's best AI company, has a very much flatter structure from what I understand as a result of using AI. They have much less one-to-one meetings. It's much more about establishing objectives and the senior leadership ensuring those objectives are met. It's a very different, their organizational spans, I'm told, are 40 or 50 people, whereas McKinsey would tell you that the maximum number of people you can management span is 12 or 13 people. So AI is going to create, in my view, different organizations, spans and spreads, and make companies much more efficient, not just from a productivity point of view, from a physical productivity point of view, but from a mental productivity. So the silos will be reduced. The people who want to cooperate will be able to cooperate much more effectively with AI. So I see it as being, there are pluses and minuses. If you said to me, overall, where do I think employment's going to end up? John Maynard Keynes, the famous economist, wrote, I think it was in 1933, an essay on the impact of automation on employment. And he ended up saying we'll have more holidays. Well, he was 100 years too early, or close to 100 years too early. We are going to have more holidays. I think net AI will reduce the demand for labor. So we'll see how that plays out.
A little bit about everything that surrounds us today. So, all the macroeconomic factors at play, which is impacting us in every country and globally. War in West Asia, unrest in the Red Sea area, the Russia-Ukraine situation, more than 80 countries going in, going in for polls. And of course, you have the whole Iran-Pakistan situation as well, which is kind of brewing at the back burner. So with all of this happening, is 2024, are the fears of recession actually valid? Are we going to go in, are we going to see a repeat of what we saw possibly in 2008, 2009?
Well, you got two different things going on. I mean, it's rather like the relationships with the US and China. So the world's problems, US, China is number one, I think, their relationship. Number two is Russia, Ukraine. Number three, I think, is the Middle East and Iran. I mean, all these the Hezbollah, Hamas, their proxies, the Houthis, their proxies for Iran. Beyond that, you have North Korea. You mentioned Pakistan, and I mean, you've got other issues as well, but I think those three are the biggest ones. I spoke to somebody actually a couple of nights ago who used to be a spook, I guess, a spy, or head of one of the intelligence services. And I said, should I worry about World War III? And he said, no. He said he went through those three crises and said, no. He said basically US and China are reliant on one another. There's a twin track with the US and China. There's the political track, which is fraught with problems. And then there's an economic track where, despite the tariffs and everything, people are trying to work together. The communication, Yellen goes to China several times, and there's communication. Russia, Ukraine is really difficult. If Russia is making some gains at the moment in Ukraine, partly because of the delays in supplying Ukraine with weapons from the US and indeed Europe. Look, to my mind, David Cameron, I think, is supposed to have convinced Trump to back more weapons for Ukraine, because that would ensure there'd be some form of agreement. Put pressure on Zelensky to do that. Whether that's the truth or not, it doesn't look good at the moment in Ukraine. And even if Russia was defeated, or even if there was an agreement, does this stop Putin's ambitions? I would say no. Iran will continue to push. I think Israel faces an existential crisis, and I think it's an extremely difficult. And as a Jew, I'm obviously extremely subjective and emotionally affected by that. The spook I remember referred to said, in his view, the most significant risk was not in those three areas, because Russia will get what it wants to some extent. Iran will get what it wants, continually trying to destabilize the Middle East. I mean, Saudis appear to want to do a deal with Israel, which is probably the only piece of good news that Israel, along with other Arab nations. But he said that the biggest sort of outside risk would be North Korea, so that the supreme leader there might do something irrational. So he told me not to worry about that. And what you're saying is about recession. Fear of recession, I mean, you listen to Jamie Dimon, he talks about government debt to equity, debt to GDP ratios. The Chinese debt to GDP ratio is getting up towards 100%. So we are talking about heavily indebted nations, primarily driven by excess spending, starting with COVID and on defense spending has to be increased because of security. So you're talking about two different things. Business can't do anything about. I mean, business at the margin can do anything about it. At a recent conference I attended, the number one risk that those business leaders, about 100 of them in the room, identified was cyber security. The number two risk was geopolitical, but at the same time, along with geopolitical, was regulation. And in the previous poll that I'd seen at the same conference about 3 months earlier, regulation was the top worry, and geopolitical was not the top worry. What the point I'm making is I think business feels that it can't really influence geopolitical. It's a risk that it has to navigate. So it spends more time, as a result of what you just said. North and South America are growth spots. The Middle East, because of what's happening in Saudi and Qatar, the UAE is a growth spot. Asia is a growth spot with the qualifier I said about China, but India, Indonesia, Vietnam, etc., Malaysia, the Philippines, they all benefit. Singapore, Malaysia, they all benefit from it. Europe is about cost. So AI actually is really very important in a European context, because that's the way you reduce cost. And every client I talk to looks at Europe as being a cost reduction opportunity, not a revenue growth opportunity. So France, Germany, Italy, Spain, and the UK, it's tougher. Big markets, important markets, but not where you look for growth. I mean, we're all sitting here in the UK and saying wonderful when we grew by 0.6% GDP in the first quarter of this year. I mean, that's not anything in my view to write home about. So I think fear of a recession is more driven by debt, inflation, not driven by the geopolitical things. So you have to separate the two.
Fair enough.
And my view is we'll probably have, I think the Fed will start to reduce rates. You know, maybe if they really take a hard line on inflation, it won't be till next year, but later on this year, we'll certainly get cuts in the UK and the ECB, maybe in June, maybe in July. And we've already had cuts, what is in Sweden and Switzerland, I think it is, the central banks have started to cut. And the markets are signaling, you know, that sort of thing is going to happen.
Thank you so much for your time, Martin. Always a pleasure. Thank you for these really insightful comments that you've made across a myriad of subjects. Here's hoping to see you very soon when you visit India, and of course.
Me too. Me too. Well, hopefully I'll be back. I'll be back at the end of June.
Yeah, and I hope to see you then. I'm wishing you until then good health, fortune, and of course happiness. Thank you so much.
And good luck to Modi.